Yeah, and having all these different solutions to be able to still meet the needs of the patient and be able to customize the protocol for that patient specifically, which I think that's kind of the main point of the compounding pharmacy, isn't it? To
Oh,
customize the experience for people.
that's exactly right. And I think that if you ask patients, patients these days are smart. They're not just idiots that just say, oh, you just take care of me, doctor, and I'll just do whatever you say. They're thinking for themselves. And most patients, I think something like almost 90% of patients trust a customized treatment plan for them as opposed to a cookie cutter that this is one size fits all.
Yep.
There's very few people who just say, you know what, I just trust what the drug companies and my doctor says, and I'm not going to even worry about it. Most people are thinking what is optimal for me.
Welcome to the Summit for Wellness podcast, where we help you climb to the peak of your health. And now, here is your host, Brian Carroll.
If you go to the doctor and the doctor prescribes you something, do you want something that is just pulled right off of the shelf and is ready to go? Or do you want something that is catered more specifically to your own needs? That is a question we're going to be answering in this episode with Jim Hrncir. What's up, everyone? I'm Brian Carroll, and I'm here to help people move more, eat well, and be adventurous. And I'm sure that you would love for your own body and needs to be very simple and have something ready to go right away if you do go to the doctor. However, I'm pretty sure you would probably also want whatever protocol is given to you to be catered to you specifically as well. Now, as you know, the things that you may need might be different than someone who's 80 years old or someone that is in a completely different state of health than you. However, in a lot of cases, these prescriptions are given the exact same. So Jim Hrncir is a pharmacist, and he has a compounding pharmacy, which goes one step beyond what a traditional pharmacist would do. They're taking these pharmaceuticals and they're compounding them together to create more unique and specific protocols specifically for your own needs. So Jim Hrncir is recognized as one of the pioneers of modern pharmaceutical compounding. He is responsible for the formulation of many bioidentical hormone, dermatological, nutritional, and anti-aging compounds in wide use throughout the U.S. And he has worked in radio and TV, including multiple appearances on Dr. Phil as a hormone expert. We'll definitely be diving into the pros and cons of compounding pharmacies and why they should be recognized as a reliable source for treatment options for patients, and why it is that there is so much pushback against it. So if you do enjoy these episodes and you do enjoy these content, please head on over to your podcast app and leave us a quick rating and review. Those ratings and reviews do help us to get out in front of more people and to help the show expand. And it usually only takes about 30 seconds to do. All right, let's dive into my conversation with Jim. Thank you, Jim, for coming onto the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Brian. It's great to be here.
Of course, and I'm really excited to chat with you because we'll be talking about compounding pharmacies and how to tailor medication based on the patient's needs specifically. But before we get into all that, let's learn a little bit more about you and what is your background.
Okay. Well, I got out of pharmacy school in 1979, so I'm an old guy. And not long after, in 1984, I actually opened this pharmacy and have been working in this pharmacy ever since. We're just a corner drugstore, Las Colinas Pharmacy, but we specialize in integrative medicine, and custom compounding therapies to satisfy that model of thinking, because most patients enjoy some degree of natural medicine or integrative medicine in their idea of what is health, so we fill that niche.
So what all goes into integrative medicine? Is that more than just here's a couple medications for you?
Exactly. When we're in integrative medicine, we're thinking in terms of, okay, root cause analysis. Instead, if you told me, you said, gosh, Jim, I've got high cholesterol, my first thought as an integrative medicine practitioner would not be, hey, let's give you a statin drug and Band-Aid that cholesterol down and you'd be on that medication for the rest of your life. Instead, I would say, what's the root cause of your high cholesterol? And I would say, well, for most cases, that is insulin resistance. We can fix insulin resistance with a new eating style, and you're going to be healthier. Matter of fact, by the way, Brian, did you know that if we get your testosterone right, it'll probably reduce your blood sugar by as much as 15 to 20%? And that's going to help with this lowering cholesterol as well. So we start thinking about root cause. I mean, if I see an autoimmune disease, I'm going to say, what is going on in that person's body that caused them to have an autoimmune disease? And then I'm going to say, what can I do to fix that?
Yep, totally makes sense. And that brings up a question that I would like to know more about. What is the relationship between a physician and the pharmacy? Because it sounds like you're kind of doing both. You're trying to work with the health needs of the person, but you're also a pharmacy. So is there a difference? Does the physician have final say in stuff? Does the pharmacist have final say in what's prescribed? How does that work?
Well, the physicians who choose to work with a compounding pharmacy can either go two routes. One, they can say, gosh, Jim, you know more about this than I do. What do you suggest as a treatment plan? And then also, can you suggest the best compounded medications to customize for this patient? On the other hand, there are other physicians who are highly advanced, and they may say, you know what, Jim, I already know what I'm going to prescribe. I just want you to make the best possible quality compound for my patient. And so either way, we take that charge very seriously. And matter of fact, in our compounding pharmacy, you wouldn't believe how much it's changed. From the old days when we kind of threw stuff together to now. I mean, if you're a top compounder, you have to use science. You have to use advanced knowledge in traditional integrative medicine in order to make the best decisions. We use compounding expertise. You got to know, like, this base plus this chemical work, and this chemical is a better quality chemical than that chemical. We've got to use those kind of judgments. We have to have the right equipment. Because, we have, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 scales. Each one of those scales is $5,000 because we measure precise amounts of active ingredients. We send them off for testing, to make sure that it actually is. Like if I say, hey, this is testosterone, 100 milligrams per milliliter transdermal cream, it really is 100 milligrams. It's not 90 milligrams. It's not 120 milligrams. It's 100 milligrams. And we also we have tons of standard operating procedures that we follow. All of our people are gowned and garbed, just like they're in a clean room, And you'd be surprised at the quality and everything that's going into each one of these compounds.
Yeah, and let's dive into what exactly a compound is. So I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with, you can go to a grocery store or pharmacy and get like Advil over the right off the shelf or anything like that.
Sure.
So compare compounding pharmaceuticals to something that you can grab off the shelf. What's the difference?
Yeah. For years I've been making something that's like Advil. It's called ketoprofen gel. And sometimes whenever I play golf, I'm an old guy. My low back kind of gets a little stiff on me, so I develop this transdermal cream that has a high dose of ketoprofen that I can put right on my low back. And I can play a whole round, and my back's not any problem at all. But if I took a bunch of Advil orally, it burns my stomach, and so I don't do well with that. And so I'm not going to take those and affect my entire body when really I only need it to work in one area. So that's just an example of a custom compound. But compounding means making from scratch. We take active ingredients and inactive ingredients along with bases and all kinds of stuff and put them together and make compounds, whether it's capsules or creams or suppositories or eye drops, injectables. You can imagine we make I have something like 20 or 30,000 formulas, of stuff that we do here.
Which is really neat because instead of being a traditional pharmacy, which is kind of like a pill distributor, you're actually getting your hands in there. You're making all sorts of different compounds and really figuring out what works well and it combines well with each other. I would say that would probably make your job a lot more fun too.
You bet. And, I had a lady, she's a grandmother, and she keeps her child, as a 2-year-old, and she was using topical hormones on her skin, and she loved them, but when I told her, I said, now, if you use those on your arms and you pick up your baby, that's going to transfer those hormones onto your baby. And she says, well, what can I do? And I said, I'm going to give you a cream that you can use instead of topically. We're going to put it on the labia. And therefore, the hormones will go through the labia into the bloodstream. You'll get the good effects of your hormones without any exposure to your baby. So you get to continue being a grandma, It's an example of us problem solving.
Yep. Yeah, and having all these different solutions to be able to still meet the needs of the patient and be able to customize the protocol for that patient specifically, which I think that's kind of the main point of the compounding pharmacy, isn't it? To customize the experience for people.
That's exactly right. And I think that if you ask patients these days are smart. They're not just idiots that just say, you just take care of me, doctor, and I'll just do whatever you say. They're thinking for themselves. And most patients, I think something like almost 90% of patients trust a customized treatment plan for them as opposed to a cookie cutter that this is one size fits all. There's very few people who just say, you know what, I just trust what the drug companies and my doctor says, and I'm not going to even worry about it. Most people are thinking what is optimal for me.
Yep. And that's how it should be. You should be getting stuff specifically and optimized for your own self. Now, one of the things you mentioned, you have like 20,000 plus different compounds and formulas that you can use. It brings up a very good point about really understanding how every single ingredient interacts with each other. So we had talked about that physician-pharmacist connection and relationship before, and it's very difficult to know how something is going to react with something else unless you spend all your time studying that information. So when you are creating these compounds, how is it that you're able to know if I change this a little bit, it's still going to be super effective, or is it going to interact with the other ingredients that I might be compounding with, and that could potentially lead to, I don't know, maybe problems or something?
That's a good question. And we do have a lot of databases that we can consult. We have experts that we can consult. When you've been doing it as long as I have, you understand how to look up science. Science means studies and maybe stability studies, potency studies, to understand that let's just say a drug company is making a certain strength of something, and the doctor says, Jim, I want you to make twice that strength in eye drop just for a bad infection, because this infection, the weaker strength that's manufactured is not going to work for this patient's eye. And we know for a fact that we can give it a certain, we have limitations on our practice, I should say, that say, okay, you can only give that a certain day's expiration date, because we know that potency-wise, it's going to last for 14 days, but it's not going to last for 2 years. So we have to work with shorter potency dates, beyond use dates is what we call them. And we have to use our best judgment in order to take care of the patients.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
It's a really good question, though, Brian.
Yeah. And I think it sounds like one of the neat things about that, too, is, a lot of people, they might have a lot of leftover medications. And I don't know what it's like in your area, but we have disposal places where you can dispose of certain medications that there's extras of. When you're compounding, is it less likely to have a bunch of leftover medications out there?
We usually give what we think they're going to use. And for instance, that's a good thing about compounding is we can give precisely the amount that we think they're going to need. And I give 90-day supplies, and we call patients up at 80 days and say, you should be ready for a refill. And it helps us to know if they're complying with their therapy. If they say, oh my gosh, I've still got a bunch left. Well, but on the other hand, though, we would not give a 90-day supply if they're only supposed to use it for 2 weeks.
Right.
And so again, we're customized therapies. One size does not fit all for us. So another good question. Yeah.
And when it comes to the different ingredients, are you receiving that in like a bulk powder form? How does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you, when you look at the very tip-top compounders versus some of the guys who may be getting started and just don't know as much, it makes a difference where you buy your chemicals and what quality you're buying them in, because most of them have a designation that's called USP or NF, and basically it's a standardization. But I can give you an example. Had my wife, she's one of my hormone patients, and we had her on a hormone estrogen cream for her estrogen replacement, and my supplier of the top quality chemical ran out. And so I bought it from another supplier, and her serum level of estrogen dropped from 50 down to not measurable. In spite of the fact I used the right chemical, I made the compound the right way, but the quality of the chemical made that big a difference. And because she told me, she said, Jim, I'm having hot flash. I said, couldn't be. I made it correctly. I checked the formula, and I found out that we'd had to change suppliers because the chemical was not available. It was back ordered, and unfortunately, it made a big difference in her therapy success.
Interesting. Yeah, quality control is important.
I tell you, I could buy the cheap chemicals and save a lot of money, but to me, the most important thing is how is it working in my patient, not how much money I make.
Yep, and that's how it should be. That's
Ethics.
True healthcare right there. What are some of the common medical conditions that you're discovering is very effective to use a compounding pharmaceuticals with?
Yeah, we do a lot of bioidentical hormone therapy, and bioidentical means biologically identical to what your body makes. And patients like that idea. They like saying, okay, these are not chemically changed. They're exactly the same hormones that my body's made my whole life. We say yes. And they said, I'm comfortable with that. And so we do a lot of customized hormone therapy for both women and men. We do a lot of thyroid therapy for thyroid optimization. We make veterinary products for pets and for large animals like horses. We make all kinds of things for mood disorders, pain therapy, beauty products. Matter of fact, I developed a whole beauty line for a very famous person. You know, she wanted to, and she came to me and said, Jim, would you help me develop my beauty line? So we did, you know, because I know ingredients and I knew how to make that right work. And, you know, one of the most stirring things I do, Brian, is we all love veterans, you know, and they've given a lot for this country. And so I work with a foundation called Defenders of Freedom, and I treat patients, veterans who have had traumatic brain injury, which leads to neuroinflammation in the brain, PTSD, severe anxiety disorder, depression, and suicide ideation. These guys cannot function in society, a lot of them, you know, when they've had this traumatic brain injury, you know, blasts, you know, blown up and all that kind of stuff. So, but what we can do is we can have a lot of compounded protocols that I came up with that make these guys better. And, you know, it's amazing the success stories we're having. Matter of fact, the DOD, Department of Defense, I've met with them in November. I met with them again in March because they're so interested in this work and the results we're getting with compounded medications to help these guys get better, that they want to help. They want to facilitate a way for us to help even more veterans.
I love that. Yeah, that is awesome. That's amazing work that you're doing down there. So one of the questions that came to mind is everyone always seems to want, is it random controlled trials that people are saying is a gold standard for studying anything, which is very difficult to do because it's very easy to screw them up. But if you're making all these different compounds on site, it's very hard to do an RCT on these specific formulas because you are tailoring it to specific individuals. So what are your thoughts on that?
Matter of fact, you know, I didn't even go, I want to quickly just give you a couple other conditions. We do a lot of autoimmune conditions and fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, Lyme's, multiple chemical sensitivities, inflammatory bowel diseases, severe asthma and allergies. I just want to give you a few more things that I get to treat every day. You know, there's so much fun.
But
anyway, back to your randomized controlled trials. Matter of fact, I wrote a paper on this. and randomized controlled trials are also called double-blind placebo trials, right? And for those of people who don't know studies or science, but bottom line is the people who do the trial are biased. They want a certain outcome to happen. So even though it's randomized controlled trials, you know, they're biased and they manipulate the data and they manipulate the study to get the result they want. Whereas there's another, and that's called clinical utility. If you prove with a randomized controlled trial that a drug is going to work for something, that's clinical utility. Well, there's also another definition of clinical utility, and that is if it's being used in a broad section of patients with successful clinical outcomes. And there are small little studies, maybe not randomized controlled trials, but observational studies, trials, and all these little trials all say the same thing, that it works. Well, whenever you have both of those combined, that is actually the new definition for clinical utility. And so I don't know how you knew that, Brian, but that's pretty impressive that you were on that path. And so matter of fact, I testified in front of the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine on that topic in conjunction with bioidentical hormone usage.
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting because I believe it's about 1/3 of all pharmaceuticals that are approved by the FDA are then pulled off of the shelves within 4 years of their approval. And a lot of that goes back to the trials and the bias in the trials of certain companies want certain data to be in their favor, right?
And the biggest example of this ever, Brian, was you remember? Well, you're too young, but in 2002, you weren't even born then. But in 2002, there was a study released called the Women's Health Initiative Studies, the largest study ever done on hormones for females. Largest study ever done. And anyway, there was a biased researcher, and he released a bunch of bad data very early on in the study that said, women, if you're using hormones, because he hated hormones, he wanted women off hormones, and that was his personal bias. And he said, you will get invasive breast cancer, and you'll also get heart attack and stroke. And he didn't have the data to support that, but he just hated them so bad, he released that to the lay media instead of to like a professional journal, okay? And anyway, since then, women immediately dropped all of their hormones. I mean, you can imagine Premarin, which was the drug that was studying that pregnant mare's urine. It's a type of estrogen. It's actually pregnant mare's urine. They collect it and dry it and put it into a tablet. Number one drug in the world at the time. The number one drug in the world was dried horse's piss. Okay, excuse my language. And their sales dropped from $2 billion a year to $800 million in 1 year. 60% drop overnight. Well, you can imagine pharma was just pulling their hair out, big pharma, because they had the golden goose with this pregnant mare's urine Premarin drug. And women are not taking their hormones, and if they do choose hormones, what are they choosing? They're choosing biologically identical hormones because it seems to them maybe to be safer. Well, since that study, Brian, the researchers that were not the lead researcher, but the other researchers in that study have come out and said, you know what? That was wrong. Women are more protected on hormones. They're more protected from dementia and heart attack and stroke and breast cancer than if they were not taking hormones. So in other words, everything that was released early on that caused this hysteria about hormones was false. And And I don't know how many women I know that still today, even though it's been proven false that women are more protected with hormones, they're more protected from, again, breast cancer, 20% decreased risk, 50% decreased risk of heart attack and stroke. And also, what about dementia and everything else? 78% decreased risk of dementia if they use bioidentical hormones. So all of this has come out, but women are still scared of hormones because of that bad guy who released some bad data.
How do you prevent that? How do you create studies that don't release bad data?
I wish I could tell you that. That's, because as long as there's money involved and egos involved, there's always going to be that kind of those people out there. We always hope that they're ethical, that they'll do the right thing, because those researchers had egg on their face, and they said, wait a second, that does not represent our opinion about hormones. And they had the courage to stand up and say, you know what was released was wrong, and we're sorry for that. Here's the right data.
Yep.
That took courage.
Yep. Yeah, and isn't it most studies, if if a company or whatever doesn't get the result that they want in their studies, they typically don't want to publish that study, even though that could help to benefit future studies in being able to, okay, we know this information, this happened in this trial, even though that wasn't the result that that company was looking for. We can then take that, create a better study, learn from that study, and then create even better studies from that. So it's almost like the bad studies are being kind of shuffled under the desk, even though we should be looking at all the studies, good and bad, to be able to create better studies in the future.
Yep, that's true. And every now and then you'll see a researcher who will go in and find a bad study that got shelved. And then, he's the big hero because he brought this up. And of course, the drug then gets pulled off the market, and, it's happened over and over,
Yeah.
But I just, I like the idea of using in my little world, we have successful patient outcomes, otherwise we wouldn't be doing them. And the doctors are recognizing that every patient they put on these types of therapies, these custom tailored therapies, are doing better. And I have therapies that have an 80-90% success rate, and most drugs, like antidepressants, have a 20% success rate. We have an 80-90% success rate, and with most of our therapies, and so we're held to a very high standard, you can imagine. But when you're in this world, you better show the results,
Why is Big Pharma lobbying so hard against bioidentical hormones?
Well, that study I told you about, they lost 60% of their sales overnight. That was why Pharmaceuticals now been bought out by other companies. But they were so angry about that, about losing all those sales, their golden goose, that they started putting out misinformation about us. And doctors would call me up and say, hey, the Wyeth salesman was in and they were telling me stuff about you. And Jim, I know it's not true. And I said, you know what? They're trying to maintain their own sales, and they think the best way to do that is to get rid of us. So they've lobbied. Matter of fact, Wyeth Pharmaceuticals went to the FDA, and they said, we think that a certain form of estrogen called estriol represents a health risk to the women of America. Now, Wyeth Pharmaceuticals was being hurt by the fact that we could compound with estriol, but they didn't have a manufactured product in the United States that had estriol in it. So therefore, they went to the FDA and tried to get us to stop compounding with estriol. You know what the interesting thing was, O'Brien? That in Europe, they had 2 products that had estriol in it, and they were selling them like crazy. I guess European women were not being hurt by estriol, but American women were going to be hurt. It had to do with dollars. It had nothing to do with the health of women, but they were trying to get the FDA to do their dirty work for them. Now that is sad, isn't it? And we intercepted emails from them that said that was their strategy.
Interesting. So the FDA, they're not very big fans of compounding pharmacies, I'm assuming.
No. Matter of fact, the last head of the FDA, Dr. Scott Gottlieb, was speaking at a compounding conference last year, and he said, you know what? He said, when I was the head of the FDA, we had an anti-compounding culture. We hated compounders, and we didn't even think about it. All we knew is we didn't want them around. And he said this anti-compounding culture was just something I stepped into when I took over FDA, and when I walked out, it was still in effect. He said, now that I'm out, I'm touring compounding pharmacies, I'm touring facilities that supply you guys with chemicals. And he said, I am impressed with the quality that I'm seeing. And he said, I didn't know this stuff when I was in there. And he said, I didn't want to know this stuff. He said, all I wanted to know is what I already knew. And he said, I'm kind of apologizing to you a little bit, although a couple of you have misbehaved, in which there's bad actors in every profession, right, Brian? There's bad doctors, there's bad lawyers, there's bad CPAs, there's bad preachers, we know that there's bad guys in every profession, and there have been some bad compounders. But that doesn't mean that the 99% of us that are the good guys should be punished. And right. But the FDA actually thinks that. And I'm not anti-FDA. They do a great job on manufactured drugs. It's just that when it comes to compounds, they've got a blind eye to us. And we've tried to reach out to them. We've tried to work with them. We tried to say, let us show you what we do. And then maybe you realize that we have value and quality.
Do you think that also goes back to dollars? Because you're kind of mixing and matching different pharmaceuticals. So certain bigger pharmaceutical companies might not be making as much money because their products are being compounded with other stuff.
I think that I hate to think that a regulatory agency like the FDA is capable of doing things for money, So I hate to condemn them like that. I do know that FDA wants to get bigger. Even though it's a regulatory agency, it's like a business. It wants to get bigger and have more power to regulate. And that's just natural tendency of humankind. And so yes, they want to get bigger and have more under their belt. And they actually said in an email that we intercepted from them that a new restrictive regulation that came out said this is another nail in the coffin of compounders. So yes, they are biased against us, and I'm sad about that because I really think that we do a lot of good for a lot of patients. Matter of fact, on hormones, Brian, 55% of Americans who are on hormones are on compounded, custom-made hormones. 55%. That's over 8 million Americans are choosing custom compounded medication. Their doctors are choosing custom compounded medications. And they have a choice, and they're choosing that. Well, that upsets the manufacturers.
Yep. Yeah. It's if I was on hormones, I would want it to be custom tailored to my own needs, not someone else's needs.
When you get to be, 20, then I'll talk to you about it, okay? No, but I'm 66 and I'm on hormones, and I honestly think that it's one of the things that I do that keeps me younger. That I'm not afraid of getting old and dying, but I don't want to hurry it along. This is a gift I was given, and I want to take care of it as well as I can. Yep. And so I do a lot of healthy things, but hormones are something that I'd readily admit I'm doing because at 66, my hormones were not what they were when I was 20, so.
Yep. They change as you age, unfortunately. Well, what are some things that we can do to kind of get the FDA to open their eyes a little bit more to compounding pharmacies?
One of the things is I'm a member of a group called the Alliance for Pharmacy Compounding, APC. And APC is our professional group, and advocates for compounders and also for patients' rights and also for the physicians' rights to be able to choose compounds. So anyway, patients and doctors who might be listening, if they'll go to the APC website or if they just go to compounding.com, www.compounding.com, and just tell their story. Just say, I was helped by this. We're using those stories right now to convince congressmen to pay attention to us, to convince FDA to pay attention to us, and not to ban these needed critical therapies that we're able to produce. And when you see every day the miracles that I see in my patients, you'd understand that, but they don't want to understand that. And so we're appealing both to the public, to Congress, and to FDA, and we're using patient stories and doctor stories in order to get that message out. So if you go to compounding.com and tell your story, we will use that. And so please do it. If compounding has helped you or a family member, go to compounding.com, tell your story.
Perfect. It's a simple ask, and if you have benefited from compounded pharmaceuticals, then definitely be an advocate for it and go to compounding.com to be able to share your story so that can be used to keep this compounding pharmaceuticals going. Well, Jim, one final question for you, and that is, what is your vision of what healthy looks like, and what are 3 things you do daily to reach that vision?
I thought about this a lot. And, I like to see patients striving for optimal health and also quality of life, because it's not good to just strive for one or the other. You want to do both. healthy and quality of life, and so the thing I see most Americans shooting themselves in the foot with is their eating style. People just eat horribly. It's called the sad American diet. The standard American diet is sad for a reason. And, we've got so many things pounding us about what we need to eat, and most of them are bad. So I tell you, I use a kind of a clean protein. I usually use free range, organic proteins. I use low glycemic index vegetables. I eat almost grain-free. Grains are inflammatory to everybody, in spite of the fact that I don't have stupid on my forehead. I love grains, but they're just not good for you. Cleveland Clinic did a study on grains. They were inflammatory to 100% of people who eat them. So it doesn't make any sense to eat grains whenever they're bad for you, except for the fact they just taste good. So I eat differently than a lot of people. I eat low inflammatory, but also exercise is not optional. Yeah, one of my doctors told me that years ago. Said, Jim, exercise is not optional. and I also maintain balanced hormones and thyroid in myself, and I challenge my brain. Everybody does not understand that brain plasticity is something you earn. You doing new things. If it's uncomfortable to your brain, do it. That makes your brain do new neural pathways. And as much work as I do on brain for my soldiers with traumatic brain injury, it's so important to work on brain plasticity by doing new things. Learn a new language, learn an instrument. Learn a new sport. Do stuff that your brain is not comfortable doing.
Excellent. Well, Jim, people can find you at lascalinespharmacy.com. You're also on Facebook, Twitter as well, and people can learn more about that in the show notes for this episode. Is there any final things you want to say?
I just want to thank you for having me on and allowing me to spout some of my opinions and also some advocacy things, because I just want everybody to maintain choice. I want you to be able to choose what therapy you want. If it's traditional medicine or natural medicine, I want you to be able to choose that. And I want your doctor to be able to choose that. And so, help us out, and so thank you for allowing me a little platform to talk about that.
Of course, Jim. And it was fantastic having you on the show.
Hey, thank you.
I hope you were able to learn a little bit more about the pharmaceutical process and how pharmacies operate, and especially how compounding pharmacies are changing the game. And I hope you also recognize that there are certain regulatory issues that are involved when it comes to compounding pharmacies. And hopefully the FDA and other organizations are able to take a look at these and see that it is a complementary option for helping patients, and to not just shove it to the side. So if you want to learn more about Jim, then head on over to lascalinespharmacy.com. If you want to learn more about compounding pharmacies, head on over to compounding.com. And you can find more about Jim on Facebook, Twitter as well. All right, next week I have Dave Sherwin on the show. Let's go learn who he is and what we'll be talking about. I am here with Dave Sherwin. Hey Dave, what is one unique thing about you that most people don't know?
I almost never get asked about my family on podcasts because of the nature of health. People want to hear about health, but I have 6 kids and 6 grandkids. And so that's something that most people probably wouldn't know, because I rarely talk about it. And I'm trying to be healthier than all of them.
Yeah, you can't let any of them pass you in anything.
I want my grandpa bod to be better than their 20-year-old bod.
Exactly. I love it. Yeah. Well, what will we be learning about in our interview together?
We'll be learning about coming up with effective supplementation and nutrition and fitness strategies and ways to make it more fun and enjoyable, and several tips. I think there's going to be quite a few nuggets of general health that I think would help people to raise their fitness or nutritional level.
And what are your favorite nutrients or foods that you think everyone should get more of in their diet?
Number one is we've got to increase the quality of our nutrition. And by getting 5 to 9 servings of fruits and veggies every day, that's the number one way to do it. Unfortunately, we also know from the healthy biohackers of the last 10 years or so that even when you eat really healthy, there's some nutrients you're still going to be deficient in. And so come up with an effective supplementation strategy. And so I'd say start with food, make food the base, of course, but then also figure out the supplements that will fill in the deficiencies that aren't coming from our modern food anymore.
And what are your top 3 health tips for anyone who wants to improve their overall wellness?
Actually, my number one is a non-physical thing, and it is meditation. I think that a lot of people are struggling to reach goals because of stress and difficulties in their lives, and having a stress management program like a daily practice of just simple meditation. I'm not talking about becoming a monk or anything like that. Just getting like an app, Headspace or Waking Up or Insight Time or any of them, and just sitting for 10 to 20 minutes a day, I think is a wonderful habit. And then starting a reasonable health program. Too many people are bouncing from named diet to named diet and never arriving at a real world thing that they can do for the rest of their lives. So finding a reasonable plan you can follow. And the last one is we're learning from these blue zones, the 5 areas of the world where people live exceptionally long, happy, healthy lives, that there's other non-physical things that are important for our health, like humor, like being positive. And we live in a world of negativity, negative news, negative people, negative celebrities, negative politicians, you name it. And we have to combat that by turning them down and by turning up positive people and positive influences and humor in our lives. So those are some things I think that would make for a much better and more enriching life.
I just love Dave's approach that you can be fit at any age and how to cater your workouts based upon your fitness level and your age group. So until next time, keep climbing to the peak of your health.